Picture a teenager's closet from 2007. A cap with a winged skull. A t-shirt with a rhinestone tiger. Jeans with a logo you can spot from across the street. Anyone wearing all of that at once was considered cool. Today, those same items are either a meme or a vintage find at a thrift store for pocket change. Fashion is the fastest way to test how fragile even a billion-dollar empire can be. A brand can spend years building its status and lose it in a single interview, a single scandal, or simply because a generation grew up and wanted something else. In this video, we'll go through the stories of brands that were absolutely everywhere, on magazine covers, on red carpets, in every mall, and then almost disappeared. We'll find out exactly what destroyed them: greed, scandal, an inability to change, or just the ruthless law of fashion that says anything too popular is doomed to go out of style. And at the end, we'll talk about something even more interesting: why some of these brands are making a comeback right now, and what that says about how fashion actually works. Let's get into it. Let's start with, arguably, the brightest symbol of the mid-2000s, the Von Dutch brand. The name comes from Kenneth Howard, a motorcycle pinstriping artist nicknamed Von Dutch, who was active back in the 1950s. But it wasn't his artwork that made the brand iconic. It was the entrepreneurs who bought the naming rights in the 2000s and started producing snapback trucker caps embroidered with the winged skull logo. And it exploded. Paris Hilton, Britney Spears, Jay-Z, Ashton Kutcher, everyone was wearing these caps. The price of a simple baseball cap shot up to hundreds of dollars, and resale on the secondary market turned it into a status symbol, similar to what a Rolex once represented. But that's exactly where the problem began. Von Dutch became a victim of its own success. When literally everyone is wearing an accessory, from top-tier celebrities to third-rate reality TV contestants, it instantly stops being exclusive. Fashion lives on contrast. Something is fashionable precisely because not everyone wears it. Once the logo cap started selling on every corner and the market was flooded with counterfeits, the magic disappeared. On top of that came internal conflicts among the brand's owners, lawsuits, accusations, a fight for control over the creative direction. And, as later revealed in the Hulu documentary, The Curse of Von Dutch, archival letters surfaced containing racist and anti-Semitic remarks from the artist Howard himself, written back in the 1990s, that effectively buried any attempt to publicly revive the brand at the time. By the late 2000s, Von Dutch had essentially disappeared from fashion conversations. The winged skull logo, which once bought you status, had become a symbol of the tacky excess of the bling-bling era. Interestingly, in the mid-2020s, the brand is experiencing a new wave of popularity, riding the Y2K nostalgia trend. Kylie Jenner and other influencers have been spotted wearing it again. But that's a different story, about how fashion moves in roughly 20-year cycles. If Von Dutch was a symbol of glamour, Ed Hardy became a symbol of excess. The brand was founded by designer Christian Audigier, based on the work of legendary tattoo artist Don Ed Hardy. Tigers, dragons, roses, skulls, and old-school tattoo art style, printed on t-shirts, caps, and even perfume bottles. At its peak, around 2008 to 2009, Ed Hardy was associated with a very specific type of male image: a tanning bed tan, gelled-up hair, a skin-tight t-shirt with a tiger on the chest. That look became so ingrained in culture that it got its own name, Guido, or later the gym tan laundry aesthetic, popularized by the reality show Jersey Shore. And here's the paradox. The very show that made Ed Hardy recognizable worldwide also killed it as a fashion brand. When clothing becomes tied to a specific, heavily mocked cultural archetype, it becomes almost impossible to separate the two. Ed Hardy stopped being expensive designer clothing featuring tattoo art and became a visual punchline, a costume for a tacky 2000s theme party. Add to that market oversaturation. The Ed Hardy logo ended up on absolutely everything. Phone cases, bedding, energy drinks, even cigarettes. When a brand that positioned itself as premium starts appearing on cheap goods in every souvenir shop, exclusivity evaporates instantly. By the 2010s, Ed Hardy had essentially vanished from any serious fashion conversation. Today, the style makes a comeback only ironically. As part of that same nostalgic Y2K trend we already mentioned, but no longer as status clothing, just as a cultural artifact of an era. American Apparel is a different kind of story. This isn't about a logo becoming overexposed. It's about how one person's character can bring down an entire company. The brand was founded by Dov Charney in 1989 on a strong idea. All clothing manufactured in the U.S. at a single factory in Los Angeles, without relying on cheap overseas labor. In the mid-2000s, that sounded revolutionary. American Apparel became a symbol of ethical, made in America fashion, and, at the same time, a cult brand thanks to provocative, highly sexualized advertising and simple basics. Hoodies, leggings, t-shirts, worn by both hipsters and celebrities. The company's peak came in 2008, when revenue reached almost $634 million. But alongside that success, scandals kept piling up around Dov Charney. Numerous sexual harassment allegations from female employees, lawsuits, reports that he conducted business meetings in inappropriate attire. In December 2014, the board of directors finally fired him as CEO. But it was already too late. The company had been losing money every year since 2010. In October 2015, American Apparel filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy with roughly $300 million in debt. It tried to restructure and emerged from bankruptcy in February 2016, but within months, sales fell by another third. It turned out the business model simply couldn't withstand the competition. A basic American Apparel t-shirt cost around $28, while a comparable item at H&M or Forever 21 cost $8, $12. As long as Made in the USA was a fashionable statement, people paid the premium. Once the generation shifted to fast fashion, that premium stopped justifying the price. In November 2016, less than 9 months after emerging from its first bankruptcy, the company filed again. It had roughly 2 weeks of cash left. Canadian company Gildan Activewear bought the brand rights and part of the assets for $66 million, a tiny sum compared to the company's peak valuation. American Apparel as a physical retail chain effectively ceased to exist. The name survived. Today, it's just a basic clothing line under new ownership, with no connection to the cultural phenomenon it was in the mid-2000s. The lesson of American Apparel is simple and harsh. Even the strongest brand idea can't survive when the face of the company becomes toxic and the business model fails to keep up with a changing market. Now a story that became a textbook case in business schools. Abercrombie and Fitch. In the 1990s and 2000s, under CEO Mike Jeffries, the brand became a dominant cultural force in American shopping malls. Shirtless model clerks at the entrance, dim lighting, loud music, heavy cologne in the air. The entire shopping experience was built around the idea of exclusivity. If you're in this store, you belong. And it worked for a while. In 2006, Jeffries gave an interview to Salon in which he openly said the company deliberately didn't want overweight or not attractive enough people wearing its clothes. The quote was roughly, "We only market to cool, good-looking people, and yes, we deliberately exclude everyone else." In 2006, this somehow slipped past wide public attention. But in 2013, as the cultural conversation around body positivity and inclusivity was gaining momentum, the old interview resurfaced and spread across social media. The backlash was massive. The company was accused of ageism, fat shaming, and elitism. Jeffries apologized, but the damage was already done. The problem wasn't just reputational. At the same time as its 2013 sales peak, the company's stock had lost about a third of its value. Despite record revenue, net income had dropped 65% between 2010 and 2013 because the company was only maintaining sales volume through constant discounting. And its pricing strategy remained premium, meaning customers were paying for the very exclusive status the company had just publicly insulted. Shoppers began switching en masse to competitors, American Eagle, Aeropostale, and fast fashion players like Forever 21 and H&M, which offered a similar look at a much lower price without the toxic marketing message. In December 2014, Jeffries resigned. The stock jumped on the news of his departure. Investors literally celebrated the fact that the founder of the brand's image was leaving the company. Interestingly, Abercrombie & Fitch is one of the few brands in this video that genuinely recovered. A few years later, under new leadership, the company reinvented itself completely, removed shirtless models from marketing, expanded its size range, dropped the overpowering in-store cologne, and made its advertising inclusive. And it worked. Today the brand is profitable again. But it took years of the name Abercrombie being synonymous with a shameful marketing approach rather than status to get there. Now here's an interesting paradox. Brands that destroyed their competitors through low prices eventually fell victim to that very same logic. In the 2000s, Aeropostale was one of the main beneficiaries of Abercrombie's decline. More affordable, simpler, without the scandalous image. But a business model built entirely on cheap basics in shopping malls proved fragile once shoppers massively shifted online and toward even cheaper competitors. In May 2016, Aeropostale filed for bankruptcy, and the chain had to be rescued through a sale to a group of investors, including Simon Property Group and Authentic Brands Group. Forever 21's story is even bigger. Founded in 1984 by Korean immigrants, the company became one of the first true fast fashion empires in the U.S., alongside Zara and H&M. By the mid-2010s, revenue exceeded $4 billion a year, and founders Du Won Chong and Jin Suk Chong were on billionaire lists. But that same aggressive expansion is exactly what caused its downfall. Forever 21 kept opening enormous stores, sometimes entire floors of malls, right as mall foot traffic began plummeting due to the rise of online shopping. The company was paying rent on spaces that simply couldn't pay for themselves as visitor numbers dropped. Add competition from even cheaper online players like Shine, capable of shipping clothes straight from their factories for $1 with essentially no rental overhead, and the math stopped working. In September 2019, Forever 21 filed for bankruptcy. In early 2020, the brand was bought out by a consortium of investors, the very same Simon, Brookfield, and Authentic Brands Group that had earlier rescued Aeropostale. The company even stabilized for a while. In 2021, it posted $2 billion in revenue. But that proved temporary. Competition from ultra-fast fashion players like Shine and Temu turned out to be so fierce that the brand found itself in trouble again by the mid-2020s. The lesson here is different from the previous stories. Aeropostale and Forever 21 didn't have one loud scandal or one toxic figure at the top. They simply failed to keep pace with how fast the industry itself was changing, an industry they themselves had helped accelerate. And finally, a brand that perfectly illustrates how quickly chic can turn into kitsch. Juicy Couture became famous for exactly one thing: a velour tracksuit with lettering across the backside. In the mid-2000s, this tracksuit was worn by Paris Hilton, Madonna, Jennifer Lopez. It became the off-duty uniform of celebrities, a symbol of luxurious nonchalance. You're so rich and famous that you can afford to look casual, except that casual costs a few $100s. But the mechanism behind its downfall is almost identical to the Von Dutch and Ed Hardy stories. Mass adoption killed exclusivity. The Juicy Couture tracksuit became so recognizable and so widely copied, including cheap knockoffs in mass-market stores, that it went from a status symbol to a visual joke. In pop culture, the velour tracksuit with lettering across the backside became instant shorthand for mid-2000s bad taste, mocked on comedy shows and worn as a costume at themed parties. The brand tried to reinvent itself several times, changing up its collections, searching for a new audience. But the image of that tracksuit stuck so firmly that escaping it proved nearly impossible. Juicy Couture still exists today, but it's a far cry from the cultural phenomenon it was 20 years ago. More of a nostalgia brand for those who remember its heyday. One more story before we get to the takeaways. And this one is a little different, because it's not really about being too cool for too long. It's about trust, and how fast trust can vanish when it comes to products aimed at kids. For decades, Claire's was the default first stop for pierced ears, glittery eyeshadow, and cheap plastic jewelry. Founded in the early 1980s, by the 2000s it had grown into a mall fixture with roughly 2,000 stores across the U.S., claiming to have pierced more than 100 million ears since it started offering the service. If you were a girl between the ages of about 6 and 16 at any point in the last 40 years, there's a good chance Claire's was where you bought your first bit of grown-up makeup or your first set of earrings. The trouble started on two fronts at once, and they fed off each other. The first front was financial. In 2007, private equity firm Apollo Global Management bought Claire's for $3.1 billion in a leveraged buyout, meaning the deal was financed largely with borrowed money that was then loaded on a Claire's own balance sheet. That's a common private equity playbook, and it works fine as long as the underlying business keeps generating cash. But Claire's, like every other mall-based retailer in this video, was getting squeezed by online shopping and declining mall traffic. By the mid-2010s, the company was carrying roughly $2 billion in debt with revenue that could no longer comfortably service it. The second front was a safety scandal, and this is where Claire's story becomes genuinely unsettling. In December 2017, a local news investigation reported that several Claire's makeup products, the kind of glittery eyeshadow palettes marketed directly to children and teens, had tested positive for asbestos, a mineral fiber linked to mesothelioma and other cancers. Asbestos isn't an ingredient anyone adds on purpose. It can occur naturally alongside talc, which is used in powdered cosmetics to stop them from caking. Claire's pulled 9 products as a precautionary measure, but publicly insisted, based on its own testing, that its makeup was safe. That denial didn't hold. In March 2018, a consumer watchdog group found asbestos in 3 additional Claire's products. And in 2019, the FDA ran its own independent tests and confirmed contamination in several items, including products tied to a collaboration with the young YouTube star JoJo Siwa. Merchandise aimed squarely at Claire's core audience of children. Claire's disputed some of the findings even after the FDA weighed in, which only deepened the sense that the company wasn't being straight with parents. The financial and reputational problems collided in March 2018, when Claire's filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, citing more than $2 billion in debt and declining sales. The company emerged from bankruptcy that October after wiping out roughly $1.9 billion of debt and securing new financing, with control passing from Apollo to a group of former lenders. On paper, the restructuring worked. Claire's kept its stores open and avoided liquidation. But the brand never fully shook off two things. First, the practical fallout. As part of a bankruptcy restructuring, most consumers lost the ability to sue the company over asbestos exposure, since claims like that get swept into the bankruptcy process rather than pursued individually. A detail that understandably didn't sit well with parents who trusted the brand with their kids' skin. Second, the reputational fallout. For a company whose entire customer base is children and their parents, asbestos in the eyeshadow is about as hard a story to recover from as it gets, and it kept resurfacing with each new recall through 2019. Claire's is a useful contrast to the other brands in this video. Von Dutch and Juicy Couture died because they got too popular. Claire's didn't die because it got uncool. Tween jewelry and ear piercings never really went out of style. It got hurt because the two things a brand for children absolutely cannot afford to lose, safety and trust, were both called into question at the same time its balance sheet was already stretched thin from a decade-old buyout deal. It's a reminder that not every fall from grace is really about fashion at all. Looking at all these stories together, a few recurring causes emerge. The first is overexposure. Von Dutch, Ed Hardy, and Juicy Couture all fell for roughly the same reason. What makes a brand fashionable? Its rarity and its association with a select few collapses once the brand becomes too mainstream, too fast. The second is a founders or executive scandal. American Apparel and Abercrombie and Fitch show just how much a brand depends on the public image of the person at the top. When that person becomes toxic, the entire business suffers, regardless of product quality. The third is failure to adapt to a changing market. Aeropostale and Forever 21 had no scandals. They simply kept playing by the old rules while the industry changed faster than they did. Online shopping, ultra-fast fashion, shifting consumer behavior. And here's an interesting point. Almost none of these brands are gone forever. Von Dutch is riding back on Y2K nostalgia. Abercrombie and Fitch fully relaunched itself and is more profitable today than ever. Fashion works in cycles. Roughly every 20 years, a generation that missed the peak of a previous trend rediscovers it. This time without the cultural embarrassment felt by those who wore it the first time around. The moral of these stories is simple. Nothing in fashion is permanent except the cycle of change itself. A brand that seems absolutely unshakable today can become a meme-worthy symbol of bad taste within a few years, and then return 20 years later as an object of nostalgia. If you enjoyed this video, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which fashion brand from your childhood or teenage years you'd like to see covered in a follow-up video. Maybe you've still got that same wing skull cap sitting somewhere in your closet. See you in the next video.